Good to go?
Good to go.
Good morning. I appreciate Tracy, the songs. Wow. Fits right in. I think I say this every time. This is one of my favorite stories. I get so excited about coming and talking about it. I spent a couple of weeks just kind of reading about what most of or a good deal of the Christian view is of life after death, and you read about the after-death experiences, and they form a vision or a conclusion of what heaven must be like based on people's experiences after they supposedly die and come back. And I'm not going to get into that today. We will in future sessions, I hope. But after last time I spoke, we touched on the state of man after we die. What's it look like? What's the Bible teach? And Tracy and I had a little talk, and I got all excited. And I remember when we talked about the foundation of this church being out of the AC, Advent Christian denomination, and some of the doctrines that are peculiar or to that particular denomination. And I still remember getting invited to the AC church in Portland, where when I walked in, there was this really beautiful woman smiling at me from the choir. I didn't even see you, Tracy. And that was it. That was like John the Baptist jumping in the womb of Elizabeth when Mary showed up. That was it. But Pastor Sid Hatch talked about when God created Adam, he formed him out of dirt, and then he breathed into him the breath of life, and Adam became a living being. And with that breath of life, we are alive, and without that breath of life, we're dead. And that breath is not an immortal soul or something that lives on in eternity. It's a life force that gives us life, and when it leaves, we're dead. And I remember thinking, what have I gotten myself into here? And then this lady named Gertrude Lucas invited me out to her farm and cooked a nice steak dinner and sent everybody else away and sat me down and proceeded to tell me all the beliefs of the AC Advent Christian Church. And I remember thinking, he's crazy and she's really crazy. So I spent 3 months studying each of these doctrines to disprove them, and ended up accepting every one of them based on what I found in Scripture. And so it's a pleasure to give you what I'm going to share today is the story of the resurrection of Lazarus, and it fits nicely with what I believe the Bible strongly teaches about what happens when we die and the mortality of man. But that's not my goal to teach that doctrine. My goal is to present the story in its context as the Bible relates it. And originally I was going to start in Genesis and give you every verse through the Bible talking about life and death and hell and resurrection, and I decided that was a multi-week session, and God said, just do Lazarus. Just do Lazarus.
You can certainly come and do it, Dad. We'll let you.
Okay, I'm already maybe going to be back in the 28th, so maybe that'll be part 2. So, okay, so if you want to follow along, you can go to John 11:1 through 46. And it tells us the story of 3 dear friends of Jesus, and Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, Miriam, Martha, and Eleazar in their Hebrew names. But Lazarus became sick. Mary and Martha sent word for Jesus to come and help him. And so let me give you a little bit of the setting for where they lived and where they were and what's going on and what it looked like, where they put Lazarus until Jesus got there and all of that. So this is a 1st century tomb. It's called the Second Temple period. So you had the first temple with Solomon, and the second temple was rebuilt when they returned from exile, and then King Herod expanded it to this 40-acre, $10 billion complex. And these type of graves and tombs are unique to that period. Only that period had it. So you find one of these tombs, you know, okay, 100 years before Christ to 100 years after Christ. That's it. So Lazarus was put in a tomb like this, if your family had enough money to have a tomb, which most didn't. Most were buried in a shallow trench with rocks put over it. But Lazarus had a tomb, so we know they probably had the funds. It was probably a family tomb. Maybe not. They were not necessarily rich, but one of their ancestors had provided for a family tomb. And so picture taking the top off of this for a second so we could look down inside. And this is what it would look like. And this is on Mount Scopus, within view of the Temple Mount. That's Hebrew University on the hill of Mount of Olives behind it. And you'll see this little bench area here. And what the tradition was, when someone died, they were taken and they were laid on this bench. They were cleaned up, maybe some spices were put on. They weren't put in burial clothes yet. Or if they were, the face wasn't covered. Okay? So maybe they were wrapped up. But they were left here for 3 days because the people believed that it took 3 days for the spirit to completely depart the body and return to God. And then the body was completely dead. If this person didn't revive in 3 days, they never were coming back. It wasn't going to happen. So on the third day, they would go and roll the stone away and take more spices and completely embalm the body, or not embalm, but anoint it, wrap it up, wrap the face, and then they would put it in one of these little niches. Okay, not those two, the side ones. And right over here is a little bitty short one. What do you suppose that was for? Children. Yeah. And so they would slide Lazarus or the body back into one of these niches that were about 6 foot tall, 1.5 by 1.5 feet. And they would leave the body there for 1 year. After 1 year, the family would return. They would remove all that was left was the bones because it had decomposed. And they would put those bones in what is called an ossuary or a bone box. And again, if you see these someplace in Israel, it's from this period. Okay? And they inscribe their name right along there. And it would be Eleazar ben, whoever his father was, son of, and that would be on his ossuary. And then they would take it and they would put it on a shelf, which you can't see, it's right over here. And they would put that ossuary on the shelf until the next person in line died, bone scraped, put in an ossuary, and then that ossuary, bone box, was taken and put in one of these rooms back here. And that's where the fathers were. That means you were gathered to your fathers. Okay? So I've seen these burial caves with 20, 30, 40 of these bone boxes still in them. Some are broken and that kind of thing, but they were gathered to the fathers. I remember on my first trip to Israel, I had to see what was behind. So I walked around behind here, and it was caved in back behind. So I thought, man, I'll never have another chance to go into a burial or a cave. So I climbed down in there. And then I decided I didn't want to go back the way I came. So right as the tour guide is talking about at the resurrection, the bodies will come out. I climbed out through this window right here.
Right on cue.
So it wasn't intended to be so ornery, but it's how it happened. So I've always enjoyed this place. So then they're put in a bone box. And that's what's happening. So where was Lazarus when Jesus came back to the tomb on the fourth day? He was in one of these burial niches right here, slid in there. Wasn't coming back till after the resurrection. So we talked about earlier, Pastor Hatch talked about Adam was formed out of the dust of the earth and the breath of life. In Hebrew, that's the neshama. That's not the word for soul. That's neshama, is animating force, a breath of life. And God explained to Adam and Eve after they sinned, before they had eaten from the tree of life, that they were dust, and to dust they would return, and the spirit would return to God who gave it. God even said, let's have them leave the garden before they reach and take from the tree of life and live forever. So there was no immortality imparted upon Adam and Eve. That only comes through the tree of life. You eat from the tree of life, you put on immortality. The perishable becomes imperishable. And we'll talk about that later, because there was another tree of life, wasn't there, that our immortality is contingent upon. So breathe into him the breath of life. So here we are. Let's get to the story of Miriam and Eleazar, Mary and Lazarus, Martha. If you want to read along with me, there was a certain man, got my stories mixed up, the rich man and Lazarus here. That'll be another week. There was a certain man who was sick, Lazarus, of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Now Bethany, I was going to have a picture here and I don't, you could stand on the top of Mount Olives and look at the Temple Mount and all the area behind it and around it, and right behind you, about 1,000 feet over the hill, is the town of Bethany. And Bethany is the English name for Beit Ani. And Beit in Hebrew means house, and Ani means poor. And it's not financially poor, it means desperate. This is the house of the desperate. So when Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the poor in spirit, he was talking about the Ani, the poor. The one, that's a state of mind where you will die if you don't get help. Your world is over if you don't get help. That's the kind of poor it's talking about. So I love the way that towns are sometimes named for their destiny, but on this particular day, this certainly was the house of the Ani, wasn't it? When Lazarus became sick and Mary and Martha's world just ended. And if he doesn't get better, he's going to die. And so if we keep reading, they were the village of Mary and Martha. And it was this was the Mary who anointed the master with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, and whose brother Lazarus was sick. The sisters therefore sent to him, saying, Master, behold, him whom you love is sick. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God and the Son of God, that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. When therefore he heard he was sick, he stayed there 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, Let's go to Judea again. So this is always one of the things that really puzzles theologians. Why would the master stay 2 more days and then go back? Why didn't he go immediately and heal Lazarus? Well, it turns out if we read earlier in the Gospels, things were getting pretty bad in Jerusalem area for Jesus and the disciples. They were going to try to arrest them. They got out of Jerusalem. It tells us that they went back down to Jericho, crossed the Jordan River, and went to Bethany beyond the Jordan. So Jesus is in Bethany beyond the Jordan. Lazarus is in Bethany up on top of the other side of the Mount of Olives. So if we had the Dead Sea here and the Jordan River is here, so the country of Jordan today is here, Petra's down in here, Bethany beyond the Jordan was right there where John the Baptist started baptizing people. It's where Jesus was baptized in that area as well. You're about 1,000 feet below sea level here, and you cross the Jordan and you climb 2,700 feet above sea level to Jerusalem. So about 4,000 feet you climb in 17 miles. Jesus is 2 days' journey. So it took the people 2 days to get to him, or a day. He waits a day or two, and then returns a day. It's a long hike, 17 miles in a day, but they usually did it. So by the time the people got to Jesus, Lazarus was already dead. It wouldn't do Jesus any good to run right back because Lazarus was dead. He would have been laid out on that rock, that platform as we talked about. So they stay there 2 more days, and then they make that journey up the hill. But Jesus has a little discussion with the disciples. He said the disciples, called Talmudim in Hebrew, said to him, "Rabbi, the Judeans are now seeking to stone you, and you are going there again?" And Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." He's just saying the time isn't come yet. We can go back. It's going to be okay. And then he said, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I will go so that I may awaken him out of his sleep." The disciples therefore said to him, "Master, if he's only asleep, he will recover." Excuse me. Now Jesus meant that he was dead. But they thought he was speaking of him just being asleep. Then Jesus therefore said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And I am going for your sakes, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe, but let's go to him." Thomas, therefore, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." Boy. And when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 1.5 miles off. So Jesus came, and Bethany is kind of up on this little hill at the base of the Mount of Olives, and then you go up over the Mount of Olives, and that's where Jesus ascended into Jerusalem on the day of the week before Passover and all of that. Triumphal entry, yeah. So at night, they would go up over the Mount of Olives, drop over the other side to Bethany. At the base of that little hill was a well, a spring. It was called Ain Ram. And travelers from coming up the Wadi Kelt from Jericho up that 17-mile hike were awfully glad to see that well. And this is probably where Jesus is sitting, having some water, resting before he does that last climb into Bethany. Okay? So it tells us that many of the Jews, verse 19, had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So there's this crowd in the house, okay? Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary still sat in the house. Again, if you take the story out of its context, you miss a lot. As I'm researching this, I saw a lot of sermons preached about how Martha was the responsible one. She went out to meet Jesus, but Mary stayed sitting in the house. What's wrong with her? Well, it turns out, even to this day in Israel, if someone dies that was close to you, you would go through a process of mourning called sitting Shiva. You would take off your shoes, you would remove the furniture to the sides of your house, and you would sit on your floor for 7 days. And people could come to you and console you, and they could come into your house and sit down, but they couldn't talk to you unless you acknowledged them. And then they could say, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Otherwise, they just sat there with you and got up and left. Well, obviously, this custom started when Job was having so many troubles, and his 3 friends came, and they sat with him for 7 days and didn't say a word. And I just kind of think it morphed out of that. So Mary is in her home sitting Shiva. Shiva means 7 in Hebrew, Sheva. So she's sitting Sheva, and friends, it says that many people are coming to console her, coming and going. Someone comes in and whispers to Martha that the master is at the well. She hops up, she goes, Mary stays there, which is perfectly fine. Okay? So that's where we're at. Here's Martha, here's Jesus. Martha therefore said to Jesus, Master, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, Your brother shall rise again. Martha said, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Now, if any of you have any doubt about what the belief was at the time of the Master, it was that there would be a resurrection on the last day. Okay? Not that Lazarus was in heaven now, and you notice he didn't say to her, don't worry, Martha, he's in a better place now. He's with his mother now. He's rocking his baby sister. I don't know the things we say to try to comfort ourselves. But the Bible's very clear about what we're supposed to say to comfort one another, and we'll finish with that today. But this time, Jesus said, He will rise again. And she says, I know, on the last day, at the resurrection, He will rise again. So that was what she believed, and Jesus didn't say, oh no, you're wrong. Jesus agreed and said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Now we'll get into this in a future topic. But Jesus is simply saying that He is the tree of life. And if we believe in Him, we will live even if we die. Because we have that promise of putting on the immortality at the resurrection. If we don't believe in Him, we won't live if we die. And that's just pretty much what He's saying. And again, she doesn't doubt that. She said to Him, Yes, Master, I have believed that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, even He who comes into the world. And when she said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, the teacher is here. He's calling for you. So she went back up the hill into the house. Mary's sitting on the floor. People are around. She whispers to Mary, the Master's asking for you. Nobody heard what she said, probably. Mary gets up. She's going to leave to go meet with the Messiah, with Master, with Jesus. And so when she heard it, she arose quickly and was coming to Him. Now, Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met Him. The Jews, or in this case, a lot of the Jewish leadership was here from the temple area, and they were with her in the house and were consoling her. And when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. So that was kind of the custom, sit in the house, maybe go to the tomb, maybe weep, because on the third day we're going to roll that back. They did roll that back, wrapped Him up, put Him in a niche, rolled the stone back again. He's already in that niche, so kind of the time to go and weep and pray is over, but maybe she's going back one more day. It's the fourth day. And therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw Him and fell at His feet, saying to Him, Master, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's also a custom at the time that it was improper for a woman to touch a man, but she could touch his feet. Because the widow in the days of Elijah had ran up to him and fell down and grabbed his feet. And Mary also anoints his feet later. And here she sits at his feet. She was sitting at his feet earlier in the story when Martha said she should be fixing dinner with us. But she falls at his feet. She gets as close to him as she can. Okay. She was deeply moved. When Jesus therefore saw her weep. Again, verse 32. She fell at His feet, saying, Master, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And I think, how many of us have lost people suddenly, tragically, maybe an accident, drowning, sickness, and it's just the worst of the worst. It really is. I mean, we can have trouble with our finances, we can deal with sickness, we can deal with rebellious kids, we can deal with whatever problems, but death is the final thing that is extremely hard to deal with when somebody you really love, especially has gone suddenly, but hard at any time. And you notice that both Mary and Martha said, Master, if you would have been here, if only you would have been here. And I think many of us have had that experience sitting at a funeral and the coffin is there, and how many of you have thought, man, Jesus prayed that Lazarus got up. Wouldn't it be nice if I could pray and that person would just get up? I remember doing that when Cheryl's dad was killed suddenly. Couldn't he just come back? Because Lazarus came back. Why couldn't that happen? And so this is just the state. I mean, they lost their brother. And in this culture, a single woman, and we don't know they're single, but it acts like that, is in trouble. Is in trouble. No income. It's just not a good situation to be in. And so when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and was troubled. And that word is greatly distressed. Really troubled, which is interesting because the master, I think, knows what's going to happen here, but yet he is extremely troubled at this point. And he said to them, where have you laid him? In other words, take me to the tomb. And they said to him, Master, come and see. And they took him to the tomb. And the shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35, Jesus wept. The Jewish legends, the rabbis taught that even when the most wicked person in the world dies, God himself weeps. Why does he weep? Because now they have no chance of repenting whatsoever, turning from their ways, turning back to him and having a relationship with him. And even the Father even weeps when the most wicked die. And so this is a picture to me of the Father and the Son weeping because death is the enemy. Sin came into the world and with it came death. And that's the sting. That's the hurt. That's the enemy of mankind, is death. And Jesus is weeping because he hates it, and he hates what it's doing to Mary and Martha right now, and he hates what it's done to them. And the Jews saw him weeping and said, Behold, how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not this man who opened the eyes of him who was blind have kept this man also from dying? So again, they're sharing some of they said the same thing Mary and Martha did. Sometimes we read this and think, man, they're pretty hard on Jesus, aren't they? But it's out of the anguish like you would feel when someone really close to you died. If Jesus himself had been here, my dad wouldn't be dead right now. And so they said that. And then Jesus, therefore, again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, Remove the stone. And Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Master, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Okay? So you remember the other 2 episodes of Jesus raising someone from the dead. They were going with the disciples to the town through the Galilee, and they were coming near the town of Nain. And a widow had just lost her son, and the funeral procession was bringing the body to the tomb where they would lay it on that stone for 3 days. And he hadn't yet had any spices put on him. And Jesus walks up and stops the funeral caravan. Now, in those days, everyone stopped for a rabbi and his disciples to go by, unless it was a wedding reception, and then the rabbi and his disciples let the bride and this come through, or unless it was a funeral procession. And then the rabbi and his disciples were expected to get behind it, follow it, console the people, be there to comfort the people. Well, in the case of in Nain, he walked up and stopped the funeral procession. That was a big no-no. Rabbis don't do that. But then he gave her back her son. He had only been dead a few hours. The other instance was the daughter of Jairus, whom was placed in an upper room, and Jesus went up. She had just died a few hours earlier, and he revived her as well. So it may have been more of a revival, a resuscitation rather than a resurrection, because these people came back in their own bodies, lived their normal life, died, and were buried. They didn't put on an immortality. And that's exactly what we're going to see with Lazarus. You said when I first started this, did he revive him or resurrect him? Well, in the eyes of the people, he was gone. It was the fourth day. Only God could do this. Only God could bring Lazarus out of that tomb, God himself. And then it would either be in his natural body rebuilt or in this immortal body that walks through walls and can still be touched and eat and all of that. And we'll get into that another time. So let's see what comes out. Where are we? Remove the stone. No, Master, it will be really foul in there. And in this hot climate in Israel, she's exactly right. We've all stumbled upon an animal that's been dead for a few days, and it isn't a good smell. Okay, Jesus said to her, "Did I not to say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they removed the stone. And Jesus looked up with his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you've heard me. For I know that you always hear me. You hear me always, but because of the people standing around, I say it, so that they may believe that you have sent me." Because only God could raise someone dead 4 days. And when he said these things, he whispered, "Lazarus." No, he didn't whisper. He said with a shout, "Lazarus, come out." And we hear that. We'll read a verse in a minute about that shout that will happen again someday. He who had died came forth, bound. How did he get out of that niche? You know, he must have had to scoot himself out and hop up and kind of come out, and he's got the face wrappings around him. In the case of Jesus, Jesus just came through the clothes, and the face covering was still wrapped up to the side, and we've had all kinds of theories about that being the napkin that the guest would come back. And in reality, he hadn't had that placed on him yet and put in the niche according to the burial custom. So here comes Lazarus, and he's even wrapped up. Man, he is wrapped up, and he comes out. And I'm sure it was a bit of a surprise. And Yeshua said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many, therefore, of the Jews who had come to Mary and beheld what had done believed in him. And this was probably Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus and maybe a few other of the Jewish leadership. Gamliel, Paul's rabbi, and some others saw this happen. And now they have to make a decision. Whom do you serve? So, I'm sorry. There! Lazarus, come out! Okay, for the Lord himself. Well, let's finish reading this second. And he came out, unbind him, and but some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus had done. So, 1 Thessalonians 4:16, we'll finish with about 3 verses here. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout. Whisper. Yeah, not a whisper. With the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Okay? This is the Mount of Olives. And you see that gold dome? That's the Dome of the Rock today. The original Jewish temple was 3 times as high. And you see, oh, that's the dome right there. You see this wall right there? That's the whole Temple Mount 40-acre complex that was where you could have up to 250,000 Jewish people at one time on the festivals worshiping. So this is the Mount of Olives. Let me get my little here. And up over the top to Bethany is right behind it. And today, this entire face of the Mount of Olives is covered with tombs, Jewish burial spots. And if you want to be buried there, it costs about $100,000 for one of these spots. And why in the world would you want one of these spots? Because they believe in the last day the Messiah will come here first. And then the dead in Christ will rise and meet him in the air. And they want to be the first. And you notice all these little stones on the tombs. They don't put flowers on, they put stones because stones have memories. Because when they cross the Jordan, pile up these stones. And when your kids ask you, what do these stones mean? So when you go and you have a memory, you put that memory on that tomb. And that's why you see that there. Okay, so let's finish with this. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable must put on the imperishable, and this mortal must put on immortality. But when this perishable will have put on imperishable, and this mortal will have put on immortality, then will come about the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? And then finally, 1 Thessalonians 4:16, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout and the voice of the archangel and the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. And then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Read this. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Because we try, when someone dies, well, they're in a better place now, or no more pain, no more suffering. And that's okay, because really, whether you believe that death is a sleep state and then you're raised from mortal to immortal, or you believe you immediately have your new body and you're in a waiting place with God and you'll return, it really doesn't matter, because time is outside the dimension of God. The dimension of time is outside. God's not bound by it. So the very next conscious moment the dead have, they will be in the presence of the Lord. I just firmly believe, though, that the Bible teaches this concept very, very clearly, and we can comfort one another with these words, the words of Martha, which says, I know at the end of time, in the resurrection, we will rise again. And sleep's not so bad. So therefore, comfort one another with these words, because death is a reality. It's the worst thing we'll ever deal with, our own death. You lost a brother this year, you lost a mother this year, you lost an aunt this year. It's a sting. It's the sting of the scorpion. It's what's wrong with this world. It's the ultimate situation that we deal with as mankind, is death. And Jesus defeated that. When he went to the cross, he defeated sin, took sin on him, removed our sin from us, and defeated death. And death no longer has sting. It no longer has victory. He will come again. We will rise. We will meet him, and we will spend eternity with him. And I can comfort you with those words. Amen? Good. All right. Thank you for having me.